"You sure that old thing even shoots straight, sir?" The young instructor smirked as he eyed the battered rifle case at the old Marine's feet. "We've got loaner rifles if you'd rather not embarrass yourself out there." 76-year-old Raymond Holcomb didn't look up. He just rested one weathered hand on top of the scuffed canvas case and said, soft as a chapel whisper, "She'll do." His 19-year-old grandson Tyler felt his cheeks burn red. He'd talked Grandpa into coming to this fancy long-range course as a bonding trip, never imagining the old man would drag along a Vietnam-era M40 that hadn't fired a round in 57 years. The other shooters were chuckling. The instructors were exchanging looks. And Tyler had no idea that in less than an hour every man on that firing line would be standing at attention. If you believe a warrior's worth is never measured by the dust on his rifle, type respect in the comments before we begin and stay until the end. Because what Raymond Holcomb did with 2 cold bore shots that morning is the kind of story that reminds you old Marines never really retire. They just wait. Tyler had been working extra shifts at the hardware store all summer to afford the long-range marksmanship intensive up in the Idaho high country. 3 days, $8,000 a slot, taught by former special operations sniper instructors with reputations as long as their resumes. When his grandfather mentioned over Sunday dinner that he used to do a little shooting in the service, Tyler thought it would be the perfect gift. He saved up, signed them both up, and helped the old man into the passenger seat of his truck for the 11-hour drive west. They barely spoke. Raymond never spoke much. Tyler's grandmother used to say her husband had brought home more silence than souvenirs from the war, and most days she wondered if the silence ever stopped echoing inside him. But Raymond had smiled when Tyler told him about the course, a small private smile. Then he'd walked to the back of his closet, lifted down a long canvas case soft with age and dark with old oil, and laid it on the bed without a word. The drive-in had been quiet too until Tyler glanced at the case in the back seat and gently teased, "Grandpa, that thing hasn't been shot since Vietnam. Are you sure you don't want to borrow one of mine? They've got chassis rifles up there that'll do everything but bring you breakfast." Raymond watched the mountains roll past the window. After a long moment, he answered, "She'll do, son. She's done it before." Tyler laughed, thinking it was the kind of stubborn pride old men carry the way they carry their suspenders. He had no idea his grandfather was telling him the literal truth. He had no idea that the rifle in the back seat had seen more country in 1 year than most American rifles see in a century, or that the man riding shotgun beside him had cycled its bolt under conditions that would unmake every shooter waiting at the range that morning. The range was carved into a long valley between 2 granite ridges, with steel targets glinting in the morning sun, at distances Tyler still struggled to comprehend. 600, 800, 1,000, 1,200 yards downrange. The other students were a mix of dentists and contractors, with rifles that cost more than Tyler's truck, all gleaming carbon fibre and titanium and 28-power glass. Their tactical packs bristled with Kestrel wind meters, ballistic computers, and rangefinders that whispered solutions into Bluetooth earpieces. And then there was Raymond, in a faded Carhartt jacket and a pair of jeans worn pale at the knees, opening that canvas case on the bench like he was uncovering a sleeping animal he didn't want to startle. Inside lay a rifle that made the chief instructor freeze mid-sentence. A Remington 700 receiver, walnut stock darkened almost black with decades of use, a fixed Redfield AccuRange 3x9 scope from the Lyndon Johnson administration sitting in original Marine issue rings. The bluing was worn silver on the high spots. The bolt knob was polished smooth by 10,000 cycles of a hand that had once known it better than its own face. It was an M40. The original M40, the rifle the United States Marine Corps had hand-built at Quantico for its scout snipers between 1966 and 1971, with fewer than 700 ever issued, and it was sitting on a bench in Idaho 57 years later, while a 28-year-old instructor named Brett Conway leaned over and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Sir, I'm going to level with you. That's a museum piece. I can't in good conscience let you put rounds downrange with optics that old." "Liability?" Raymond looked up at him for the first time. His eyes were the colour of cold river water. "Son, this rifle was zeroed at Quantico in November of 1967. It hasn't drifted in 57 years. It won't drift today." Brett laughed. Actually laughed. Tyler felt something in his chest fold in on itself. "Tell you what," Brett said, looking around for an audience. "Why don't you take the first relay? Show us what the old girl can do, we'll start you nice and easy. 600 yards, big steel, plenty of margin. A few of the dentists snickered. One of them muttered something about hoping the old man didn't drop the bolt. Tyler wanted to grab his grandfather by the elbow and walk him back to the truck. He wanted to apologize for ever bringing him here, for sticking him in front of a row of strangers who saw nothing in him but a punchline. But Raymond just nodded once, slow and deliberate, and said, "I'll take 2 shots, cold, before your warm-up, but not at 6. Brett raised his eyebrows. "Oh? You want to call your distance, Marine?" Raymond's mouth tightened at the word, just barely. 1200. The far plate. 2 shots. The whole line went quiet. 1200 yards is not a beginner shot. 1200 yards with a fixed 9 power scope from 1967, off a cold bore, with ammunition older than half the people on the firing line is not a shot at all. It is a punch line. Brett looked at the senior instructor. The senior instructor looked at the wind flags. Then he shrugged. The kind of shrug that says, "Let the old man have his moment, we'll laugh about it at lunch. Your funeral, sir, send it when ready." Raymond settled behind the rifle the way other men settle into prayer. He didn't dial the turrets. He didn't check a chart. He didn't ask for a wind call. He simply laid his cheek against that worn walnut stock, breathed out one long quiet breath, and held. The valley held with him. Tyler had never heard a range so quiet. Somewhere a meadowlark called, and stopped, and didn't call again. Raymond's finger moved. The M40 spoke for the first time in 57 years, and a heartbeat and a half later, 1200 yards downrange, the far steel rang like a church bell across the granite ridges. Nobody moved. Brett's mouth was open. The senior instructor was staring through his spotting scope with both eyebrows pulled up into his hairline. Raymond worked the bolt. That same smooth motion, polished by Khe Sanh and Hugh and 100 patrols nobody had ever asked him about, chambered the second round, breathed out, and squeezed. Ding, same plate, same spot. 2 cold shots at 1200 yards with a rifle older than most of their fathers, both rounds inside a paint can. The meadowlark started up again, like nothing had happened, like everything had. Brett Conway didn't speak. He just slowly straightened up from the spotting scope and took a step back from the bench, the way a man steps back from something he doesn't fully understand. The senior instructor, a 52-year-old retired master sergeant named Doug Vailoa, walked over and crouched beside Raymond and looked at the rifle. Really looked at it. He ran one finger along the receiver, found a tiny engraved number on the bottom of the barrel near the chamber, and his face changed. He looked up at Raymond, then back at the number, then at Raymond again, and the colour went right out of his face. "Sir," he said very quietly, "what's your name?" Raymond's voice was just as quiet. "Holcomb, Raymond Holcomb." Master Sergeant Vailoa closed his eyes for one long second. Then he opened them and asked, "Khe Sanh?" Raymond gave one small nod. 68, Hill 881 South, and after. Vailoa stood up slowly. He took one step backward from the bench, came to attention as cleanly as if he were still 19 years old himself, and saluted. Not the casual nod and touch of a man being polite. A real salute. The kind Marines hold until it's returned. "It's an honour, sir." The entire firing line was staring now. Brett Conway looked like a man who had just realised he was standing in a church with his hat on. Raymond returned the salute, slow and careful, the way you handle something fragile. Then Master Sergeant Vailoa turned to the line and said, loud enough for every shooter and every instructor to hear, "Gentlemen, the rifle on that bench is one of the original Remington 700s, hand-built by the Quantico armourers for the very first generation of Marine Scout snipers. Fewer than 700 were ever made. This one was carried on every patrol out of Fire Support Base Khe Sanh in 1968 by the man sitting behind it. He came off that hill with more confirmed engagements at distance than anyone you will ever meet, and a bronze star with valour that he has not, to my knowledge, ever spoken about. He came home, he never wore his record on his sleeve, he raised a family, and he taught himself to be quiet about it because that's what men of his generation did." He turned back to Raymond. "Sergeant Holcomb, would you do us the honour of running this morning's wind call? You see things at distance the rest of us are still learning to see." Raymond looked at his grandson for the first time since the shot. Tyler's eyes were wet and he didn't care who saw. The old man's mouth moved into that small private smile again. "Be glad to, Master Sergeant," Raymond said. if my grandson here will spot for me. What happened next was the most important shooting lesson Tyler Holcomb would ever receive in his life, and not 1 minute of it was about ballistics. He watched grown men, wealthy, accomplished, deeply equipped men, line up to shake his grandfather's hand. He watched Brett Conway approach the bench, take off his hat and apologize with a kind of stripped-down honesty that made him seem suddenly much younger and much better than he had seemed an hour before. He watched his grandfather, with the gentleness of a man who had nothing left to prove, place a hand on Brett's shoulder and say, "Son, I judged my share of men too quick when I was your age. The cure is to keep showing up. You've got good hands. You're going to be a fine instructor." He watched the senior cadre quietly clear a space on the wall of the range office that afternoon, and Master Sergeant Valoa pinned up an old grainy photograph he kept folded in his truck, a black and white shot from 1968 of a young, lean Corporal Raymond Holcomb in a boonie hat at Khe Sanh, the same M40 across his knees, his eyes already older than his face. They built a small placard underneath. It read simply, "This rifle is still here. So is the man who carried it. Respect the line." That evening, Tyler sat with his grandfather on the porch of the bunkhouse, watching the sun set red behind the granite ridges. He didn't know how to ask the question he'd been carrying all day, so he asked the smaller one instead. "Grandpa, why'd you never tell us?" Raymond was quiet for a long time. The light went out of the ridges and the cold mountain air came down around them. Finally, the old man said, "Because the men who deserved to be talked about, Tyler, mostly didn't come home. Anything I'd say about myself would be saying it over their voices, and I wasn't willing to do that." He paused, and his weathered hand drifted to the canvas case beside him, the way another man's hand might drift to a Bible. "But you brought me to a line today, son, and a line is a place where a rifle gets to speak for a man, and the man doesn't have to say a thing. That's the only kind of telling I ever felt right about." Tyler couldn't answer. He just reached over and put his hand on his grandfather's hand, the same hand that had cycled that bolt 100,000 times in the worst year of an entire country's life, and they sat there together until the stars came out over Idaho. The M40 is back in its canvas case now, oiled and quiet in the back of a closet in a small house in Ohio. Raymond Holcomb is 76 years old. He still doesn't tell his story, but every Sunday at dinner, his grandson tells it for him, to his cousins, to his friends, to anybody at the table who's ever been quick to judge an old man by the dust on his jacket or the grey in his beard. Because Tyler learned something on that Idaho range that no $8,000 course could have taught him. He learned that the quietest man in the room is very often the one who has earned the most right to speak, and chosen not to. He learned that respect is not given to a uniform or a rifle or a record. It is given to the human being who carried all three home and asked nothing for it. And he learned that some heroes don't come with parades or medals on their chests. Some come with a battered canvas case, a soft voice, and a single cold-bore shot that rings across the years like a bell. If this story moved you, if you believe our old warriors deserve to be seen, heard, and honoured while they are still with us, subscribe to this channel and turn on the bell. We tell their stories here, one cold shot at a time, because they will not tell them themselves. Tag a veteran in the comments. Tell him you see him, and the next time you meet a quiet old man with a worn-out case at his feet, pull up a chair, listen. You may be sitting next to the bell that's about to ring.